Hello and welcome back to the Fullerton College Print 101 class. This is Professor Ben Kiewit, and we are taking on our second part of our video on digital prepress, picking up with output devices. An output device is any device that takes information from your computer and puts it into the real physical world. Commonly, this includes things like inkjet printers, laser printers, little desktop printers, office printers, full-on digital presses up to the HP Indigo level of complexity, and plate makers, because plate makers also take your information from your computer and make it physical so that you can print with it. Those are all types of output devices. Output. It takes what's on your computer and it puts it out of the computer into your hands. Word processors. Here's a picture of two word processors. In the back, we have one by a company called Smith Corona. In the front, we have one from a company called Microsoft. Both of these do the same job. You might notice from the background picture on this one that a word processor is a form of a typewriter. This is one of those interesting half-step technologies from my youth before computers were fully adopted everywhere, especially in the home. A word processor was a typewriter that had a very limited computer built into it so that you could type out a document before you print it out, rather than the traditional typewriters, which every key push puts a letter on the paper. This one let you write a paragraph, or depending on how good one is you had, paragraph or a page or two at a time, and then hit go once you edited it, because you could go back and edit, and then it would put it all on the paper for you. Microsoft Word is the digital version of this. It is a word processor. It is a typewriter. Its purpose is to write a report or write a letter. Its purpose is not to create a graphical output for printing. In the same way that a typewriter is by no way a teletype machine. It's not a system for setting up a printing plate. They're not meant for that. It's not that Word is a bad program per se. It's that it is not designed for professional print output. It is not a graphics program. It is not a stand-in for Quark Express or Adobe InDesign. It is a stand-in for having a typewriter. Digital imaging. How do pictures get on computers? On the left, we have a scanner. Scanners still exist and are still commonly used, although they're no longer a big part of the professional industry. Early on in digital prepress and digital printing, they were very important because photography was still done physically using film. Now that photography has moved on to being largely digital, like that Nikon camera on the right there, that is a DSLR, a digital single lens reflex camera that is basically the same as the older, more analog film cameras, except that instead of film, it has a light sensing piece of equipment, a CMOS or CCD, which we're not going to talk about in too much detail here about the difference between those two different types of camera sensors, but it has a sensor that will record the light that hits it. I should also take this moment to rant, rave, and rail against cell phone use for taking photos. That's all fine and dandy for sharing them on Facebook and Facegram and Instabook, but it's not the best thing for printing. No matter how good those cameras claim to be on the packaging, that's a marketing ploy, and they are not the same and do not give you the same level of control as an actual professional camera. And the difference isn't so much in the sensor anymore, although it used to be, it's in the optics. You cannot, with a single little tiny lens right in front of it on the flat cell phone, take the same level of information and focus as you can get from multiple real, properly made glass lenses that you can adjust the depth and therefore focus of. And so those are two ways of getting the images onto a computer. And once they're there, it's been converted into digital data. And that digital data is binary, but I'm skipping ahead. Oh, don't have that on there. Ooh, it makes pixels. It sees everything in front of it and breaks it down into basically a mosaic, a grid of colors. And each square in that grid contains a different color. And how detailed those are and how accurate the color is in those depends on how much memory you give it. If you give it a little bit of memory, you can remember a good number of pixels, and you remember a good number or not very many colors per pixel. When you give it a lot of data, it's able to remember up to 256 levels of color for the three primaries, red, green, and blue for computers, per pixel, and you can have millions or billions of pixels in an image. This does make them rather large on the file size, but it also makes them rather detailed. Large file sizes don't just mean larger pictures with better resolution, meaning more pixels in them. It also means better, more accurate color information. The amount of memory you give per pixel to remembering color determines how many levels of in-between colors it can actually remember, or how simplified your picture gets if you go the other direction. Vector images are pictures without pixels. Vector images are not photographs or scans. They're created on the computer, and they are mathematically defined objects that look like pictures to you, a human, but to a computer a computer, they're just mathematical formulas. And those formulas determine lines. It's kind of like a very complicated graphing calculator, and also a very low calorie, lightweight version of computer aided drafting, or CAD. So this involves points where the lines start, points where the lines end, fills. If the lines connect back to themselves and make a closed object, the object can have a fill color inside it. These things can print clearly at any size, but the raster images, or the pixel-based images, don't do that. If you make them bigger, they look worse. But these you can make any size you want with no loss of quality, because they don't exist until you tell them to. What I mean is, if all you're doing is storing the formulas, that's like saying the instructions to the computer, draw a circle. And you could do that too. Think about it for yourself. You could draw a circle. You could draw a small one on a piece of paper. You could draw a big one on a much bigger piece of paper. You could walk a circle in a big field. You could draw a circle on a map. You could draw it by driving your car in a huge circle in a giant empty field. And in all those cases, you would be making the same shape. And how you make the shape will just be determined by the device you use to make it. Therefore, you're not dealing with pixels. You're not dealing with little bits that make it up. You're just doing with the shape itself. A vector image is the computer telling the printer, hey, make a circle. And it can do it at any size you want, and the printer will always make it at its maximum resolution because it will exist at the size you want it when you want it to.